And that was Christopher Fennell, by the way. And we are going to get underway here. It's a minute past the hour. We have well over 1,000 people registered. We are really glad that you are here. We have an excellent class in store for you. It does qualify for 1.5 CPE credits. It's called Microsoft Excel Formulas and Functions. And the way our sessions work is that you do need to make sure you're logged in for at least 75 minutes and respond to the polling questions. Our polling questions are queued up and they are ready to go, and at intermittent times throughout the presentation we're going to launch those. Those are a requirement in terms of receiving CPE, and certainly know that many of you on the line are not taking the class for CPE, but we're still going to ask that you fill those polls out so we can keep track of overall audience participation. And also want to let you know that we are recording today's presentation. This is not the first time that we've offered this class, and the request for the video was exceedingly high last time and is an extremely valuable resource. And given the nature of this class, it is highly likely that you'll want to go back and revisit some of the slides and or the presentation and perhaps follow along at that time with your Excel file. Lucky me, I just got my presentation back up and running just in the nick of time. Had myself a little worried there. I am going to post the first polling question, which is, have you downloaded today's PowerPoint slides and Excel file? These were provided to you in advance. You can access those by logging into your account. You can go back to the emails that were sent as part of the registration process. And there may be some mixed feelings, and perhaps, Dennis, you can, when you get started here, give us some feedback on what you think is more effective to either try to follow along if someone's using dual screen, or to simply watch the presentation and go back and revisit the Excel file after the presentation. But we have about 80% of you who have voted. Let me make that about 90% of you. And once we get a little bit further, we're going to go ahead and close this down. And about 60% of you haven't yet downloaded the Excel file. So that's fine. We'll make sure that we provide that resource to you in the form of a link. And as a matter of fact, if you look in your chat bar right now, you'll find a shortcut to it. So we're at 90%. It's been almost a minute. Wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable with how that worked. We're now back to Dennis's screen. Actually, there we go. That's what I was looking for. And with that said, it is truly my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dennis Taylor.
All right. Thank you, Scott, and hello, everyone. For some people, if you said we're going to talk about Excel, therefore we're going to talk about formulas and functions, some people might say, well, of course, isn't that what Excel is all about? Now, that's not necessarily true for everybody, but let's face it, for many, many people using Excel, the centerpiece of what they do is work with formulas and functions. And whether it's a large list like this, maybe not so heavily laden with formulas, or whether it's a worksheet, sort of like this one here maybe, or something like some of the things we see here, there are many, many times when we need to work with formulas. And not all formulas are about financial data, that's to be sure. Excel is very rich in its use of functions. In today's session, we will be talking, first of all, about formulas in general, giving you some power tips. I'm assuming that most of you have worked with formulas, at least a little bit. It can be a little bit intimidating if you worry about how many different capabilities Excel has when it comes to working with formulas and functions. Many of you know that the functions like sum and average and median and many, many others, there are well over, well, there are quite a few hundred of them, but we don't need to count them exactly, but they're really important as we work with Excel. And you might be an engineer, you might be a scientist, you might be a financial expert, or maybe you're just a record-keeping kind of person who works with a lot of different Excel files. There's so many different times that you can use the built-in functions of Excel. We'll give you some power tips. We'll spend a good deal of time on two major functions, the if function and some related functions that are often used with it, and or. We'll also spend a good deal of time on the VLookup function. We'll mention also its companion HLookup, and show you that sometimes those two functions, powerful as they are, don't give us everything, and so functions like match and index should be on your radar as well. Anytime you're trying to look up data or compare data from different worksheets, or sometimes within the same worksheet, lookup functions, particularly like VLookup, are going to be really handy. And if we have time, we'll certainly get to many other functions too, like some of the rounding functions. They've got an important role to play, and sometimes people mistakenly use formatting when they really should be rounding. We'll talk about some text functions and also point out how some of the text functions you won't need to use as much anymore because of a new feature called Flash Fill in Excel 2013. There have been a few new functions added in Excel 2010 and Excel 2013. At least one of those, Aggregate, added in 2010, is important. We'll definitely talk about that one too. We'll also bring out some date and time formulas and functions and some techniques. So I'm going to start with a few tips here. First of all, in a different worksheet here, in a worksheet that I think most of us would say, wow, that's kind of a bad-looking worksheet. It's kind of disorganized. We're not sure what's going on here. But it is related to a particular kind of operation here, and you wouldn't necessarily know what's going on. But let's face it, sometimes you get data from other sources, or maybe this is something you worked on 5 years ago. You kind of forgot about it, you bring it up, and what kind of questions run through your mind? It certainly would be handy if we could see all of the formulas in this worksheet. And you can do that very quickly with Control tilde. And some of you are saying, what's tilde? Well, I can press it again, Control tilde. We go back to normal here. I'm going to zoom in on this cell right here. I'm simply depicting in cell C1 here one of the keys that on most keyboards tends to be in the upper left corner, at least most US keyboards. Occasionally on a laptop you find this off to the right, maybe upper right. But the top symbol is generally called tilde or tilde. The other symbol, most of us don't know what to call it accent. Some books call it accent grave. If we only had a better name for that key, this shortcut would be better known. What does Control tilde do? Remember, don't use the Shift key in this. Control tilde doubles the width of columns, but more important, it exposes formulas. For example, there's one in E5, there's one right here, just below it, and so on. Every time there's a formula, we see the formula. The column widths are doubled to give you a better opportunity to see the entire formula. That's not perfect in all cases, but generally it's helpful. So it's looking like this. Now I'll zoom back to a normal zoom. And by the way, from time to time I will be zooming in and out, holding down the Control key and using the mouse wheel. That's the best way to zoom because it makes no difference where the mouse is. It can be anywhere. I'm just holding down Control as I move the mouse wheel. So here we are again looking at this worksheet. We're trying to get a bead on it, so to speak, trying to get a quick read of it. It's going to be helpful if we can see these formulas. Control tilde is what we call a toggle, back to normal, or now we're seeing formulas, back to normal, and so on. Anytime you want. Obviously it makes no content changes. It's just a different way to view the data. And it is represented in the ribbon menu system on the Formulas tab. If you've never seen this choice, Show Formulas, the pop-up tip below it does give you the keystroke shortcut, but they mention the other symbol on the key, and it's so tiny you could easily overlook it. I've even seen this in books where that sort of looks like a speck of dirt or a piece of ink or something that got misprinted somehow. So it's Control tilde. It would be better known if they used a different symbol. But anyway, it's great, and it's really handy at times. And either this button here on the Formulas tab in the ribbon or Control tilde. Another feature that would be helpful too, if you're in that worksheet troubleshooting mode, you've got to make some sense out of this and also expand it and give it more functionality. One of the things that would be helpful is to always know which cells have formulas in them. Now you can do this in not quite a dynamic way, but at least you can do it for the moment and over time adjust it too. With the active cell on one cell in the worksheet, just one, and that's important, and I'll come back and restate that. With the active cell in just one location, go to the Home tab in the ribbon, the extreme right button, Find and Select, and then choose Formulas. All the formula cells are highlighted. What I often do, and I would recommend here too, on the Home tab in the ribbon in the font group, you've got the Fill Color bucket. Let's just pop a color onto that. Any color you want. Light colors tend to work better. So I'll make them blue and then click outside of it. So I know at a glance where the formula cells are. Now, it's not dynamic, so that if I erase this cell, it's going to stay blue. If I write a new formula there, it's not going to turn blue. So every so often, you would want to remove all colors and run this feature again. But again, it's really fast. Home tab, Find and Select, Formulas. Now, if you did have 3 or 4 cells selected, as we sometimes do, and certainly nothing wrong with that, but this is one of those features where Excel will only look within that range. So if I've got these cells highlighted, and I'm on the Home tab and I go to Find and Select and choose Formulas, it says, in effect, no cells were found because it only looked within that range. So in a counterintuitive way, when you click one cell and apply this feature, it looks throughout the entire worksheet. So a little bit strange there maybe. Of course, you could click in the upper left-hand corner. That effectively does the same thing. But it's a great tool, and I use it a lot. And if you wanted to extend this a little bit, and it's a little bit more work, but if you say, I wanted to highlight all the cells that just have numbers in them, you can go to the same Find and Select button on the right-hand side, but this time choose Go to Special. And then here, you might want to click the box, or click the button, the radio button for constants, and then uncheck the box for text and logicals and errors. And then click OK, and only the cells with just pure numbers, not formulas, are highlighted. For the moment they're gray, maybe I'll come up here and make them green or yellow or something. So there's a light green. So all of the light green cells have just raw numbers in them, pure numbers. The blue cells have formulas. Again, you obviously don't have to do that, but it makes it handy, and it helps you come to understand a worksheet a bit better here, or a bit faster, let's say. Now, when you're doing data entry, and I'll just use this same worksheet maybe off to the right, suppose I'm creating a list over here, and the heading is city, and I'm looking on a sheet of paper here, I'm recording some transactions from different cities, and the city names are repeating. So let me zoom in a little bit here, off to the right there. Oops, there we go, other direction. So it just so happens that in these two cells right here, and then in this one, and then in a few down here, the city is going to be Denver. Now, a lot of you know you can select non-contiguous cells by using the Control key. So I'll drag across these two cells, let go of the left mouse button, and now with the Control key held down, click or drag here, and then down here, click and drag maybe, down here, another one, maybe another one. So they could even be in different columns. Now I'm going to type Denver, but as I type this, it looks as if it's only going into cell R13. And that's what will happen if I press Enter. But if I press Control Enter, the data goes in all those cells at the same time. And the same thing is true of numbers. It just so happens that these two numbers here need to be at 25. So does this one. And again, imagine me, I'm looking at a sheet of paper here. I just happen to have seen a lot of 25, so I highlight all these ahead of time, type 25, and press Control Enter. And the same data goes in all those cells at the same time. Now, you can also do this with formulas, and not always so obviously either. And it is time for some shortcuts, and we'll also use the autosum button here too at times. I want totals right here, and I also want totals over on the right. So I'll use the Control key and highlight all those. And this time we don't even have to go into a menu. We can use the autosum button if we wish. That's on the Home tab or on the Formulas tab. Or we could even simply press Alt equal. Alt equal. We got our totals. And in all cases here, we're adding up those, and of course over here we're adding up those, and so on. So that's handy. Now, another shortcut. I'm going to undo these by pressing Control-Z, undoing my last action. They're highlighted again. I'd like to do an average now. This time I'll use the drop arrow associated with autosum, choose average, and the averages are all done. And just, again, to point out, that's an average, and so is that one. And sure enough, over here, same idea. Probably I might want to, or I could possibly want to display decimals there because not all those are even numbers. But nevertheless, that's fast, that's easy. Now, I want to undo this again. What if we wanted to do a median? The cells are highlighted. This time I'm going to type equal median. That's the middle value in a list, or if it's an even number, it averages the middle too. The active cell is in R8, so as I'm typing equal median, I'm highlighting just the cells as if I were doing only that cell. In other words, putting in the formula only for here. I'm not typing the right parentheses, don't need to here, but if I press Enter, I will only have the median for column R. I'm going to press Control Enter, and all those are medians. Not only here, but also over here, and sure enough on the other side as well too. We've got medians for all these. So they're quick ways for putting in formulas anytime we recognize a parallel kind of situation. In all these examples with this set of data here, we were working on the 6 cells above it. So when we've got parallel sets of data like that, it's really handy to be able to use the Control key here. Also with autosum, by the way, recognize there are some shortcuts. Remember, the keystroke shortcut for autosum is Alt equal, and sometimes you'll use that, sometimes you'll use the button. Remember on the Formulas tab, you also find autosum off to the left. We want a total right here. A lot of people will click autosum, look at it, and say, oh, that's good, and they'll press enter. Nothing wrong with that. But as you get used to it, and perhaps a lot of you are, just double-click autosum. You can certainly do that. It's a tad faster. Or possibly type Alt equal and enter. So just different ways. Sometimes you might want to highlight the data ahead of time. That's not necessarily better. You do have to spend a half second highlighting the data. Then you could either click the autosum button or Alt equal. Either way. If we wanted totals only on the right, we could highlight these cells, press Alt equal, we're all set. We could also do the same down here, Alt equal, got totals there. And believe it or not, we could have just highlighted the data this way. If we knew ahead of time we wanted totals on both the right and the bottom, we've got these highlighted. Let's press Alt equal or autosum either way. That's fast. If we wanted averages instead, we've got our data highlighted. We click the drop arrow for autosum, choose average. We've got averages on the right and on the bottom. So there's some shortcuts with autosum. And keep in mind,
Dennis, I just wanted to let you know that your audio is coming in and out just a little bit. I don't know if there's any adjustments that could be made on your end. I thought at first it was just computer speakers, but just want to let you know.
Okay, okay. Perhaps I'll talk a little bit more slowly. That might help a little bit. Okay, a couple of other thoughts here about this too. Sometimes when you're adding data, you type equal sum, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not a lazy person, and you won't save a huge amount of time. But suppose I want to add up some data here from different lists here. I might type equal sum, but on the other hand, I might just click autosum or just start with Alt equal, and then I don't want to really add that data, but I want to grab the Florida data, so I'll highlight it instead, comma, and now I want to pick up the Europe data off to the left. I'll drag across that, comma. And although this would certainly be weird in real life, I'll pick up some of the data up here over in column B, comma, and then I want to add the number 1,000. I mean, I'm just throwing in the idea here that you can certainly use the sum function in a variety of different ways, gathering data from different locations without doing a lot of typing, using a combination of the mouse and the comma button here. So I'm just simply adding data from a bunch of sources, and I didn't type equal sum. I pressed Alt equal to begin the process. So autosum or its shortcut Alt equal are certainly handy at times. Now, if we're working with data here, let's say in this worksheet here, maybe we're about to calculate a new compensation amount. I'm going to zoom in on this too to make this a little clearer. In column L is a compensation value, and everybody's going to get the new rates here. But instead of 2.91, well, actually, we're going to keep the 2.91%. What I want to do, by the way, and I often do this with my examples. I usually do this ahead of time, but I don't like examples that show addresses in column O. It's harder to read and sometimes mistake them for 0. So I'm simply going to put that right there in P1. All right, there are a few different ways to write a formula here. Certainly one of them is going to be equal L2 times this amount here in P1, and then that would calculate the amount of the increase, and we could simply add on to that the existing salary. Others of you might want to use a parentheses there and put in P1 plus 1, that being within parentheses. So there's certainly different ways to write this. But the one thing that's going to be consistent about this is you will be getting data out of P1 and L2. And a lot of you know, if we start to copy this down the column in its current state, the L2s will become L3, L4, L5, and that's good, that's what we want. But P1 will also change into P2, P3, etc., and we don't want that to happen. We want P1 to be absolute. So either just after typing it, or maybe right now perhaps, we want to make sure that this has the indicators that it's an absolute value. Now you can type a $ in front of the P, in front of the 1, or as long as the cursor is around the data, anywhere there or even highlighted, you can simply press the function key F4 to make this an absolute address. Now, I want to stress here, if you've never seen this before, don't think of this as something that's intuitive. It's not at all. I mean, $ in the example here just happens to be the kind of format we might want also, because we're dealing with salaries and compensation amounts, but $ is simply the symbol that means if this address, well, it's better said, if this formula is going to be copied, we want this address to not change. That's an absolute address. Now, small tip here. If I press enter, the active cell will move down into the next cell. I want it to stay here because I'm ready to copy this. So I'll press Control Enter. There we are, like this. Now, by the way, something occurred to me. I should have said this earlier, and it's not a major thing, but I am using Excel 2013. You might be using Excel 2010 or Excel 2007. Nearly everything we've done so far works exactly the same. In a minute or so, there's one slight difference, but I will try and keep up with that and point out from time to time there might be some slight differences in these versions. But as a general rule, with formulas and functions, usually what the difference is, a few new functions are added with each version. So once again, here's this formula. I'll double-click to remind you what it looks like. And again, you could certainly do this in a couple of different ways. But that looks good, and we're going to copy this down the column. But instead of using copy and edit paste techniques, a lot of you know there's a better way to do this. We could certainly drag from the lower right-hand corner, but if you pardon the pun, this could be a real drag, because in this example here, although I haven't shown you how many records there are, it goes down to about row 700. And easily you could imagine how that might be, 7,000 or 70,000. We got a lot of room here. Great shortcut, one of Excel's best. We're going to double-click the lower right-hand corner. And this gets copied down the column. Now, I think the first question in your mind would be, how far did it get copied? And not so well known is the shortcut Control Period. And there we see it. You might want to scroll a little bit beyond that just to make sure, but we see it, Control Period. Control Period again takes us right back up top. So that's a good follow-up whenever you're copying formulas or data down a column. You can do this with data too, by the way, numbers or text. So that's a great shortcut. Let me backtrack again and remind you that the keystroke shortcut here, if explained out of context, seems practically ridiculous. What does Control Period do? Whenever you have some cells highlighted, Control Period moves the active cell around the corners. Well, how exciting is that? How often would you ever use that? Now, if you did use it, you might have some data highlighted. Might make a little more sense, but out of context, it seems practically worthless. But once again here, when we copy this down the column by double-clicking, I think we would want to know, how far did it get copied? Control Period. There we are, down to row 699. Now, I do want to point out a change that occurred in Excel 2010. And let me undo with Control Z. If you were using Excel 2007, and one of these compensation amounts was missing, so I'm going to momentarily just take this one out of here. Imagine it's not there. If this were 2007 and you double-clicked, the formulas would only get copied to here. Starting in 2010, and certainly in Excel 2013, we don't worry about that. So I'll double-click here. It's going to zip right past that. In effect, Excel looks not only to the adjacent column to the left, but it looks, you might say, leftward to see if this is all part of a larger list. And it is. So it goes all the way to the bottom of the column. And I'll press Control Period to verify that. And we see it goes down to row 699 just as it did before. So that's worth noting, and that's a good change too. So once again, pressing Control Z a few times, we can undo recent actions. There we are, back to here, and I'll double-click again. Now, there could be times too when you're tabulating data that you just want to know the totals, and you don't even necessarily need to see it on the screen or in a worksheet cell. This company, what were they spending on their various compensations? What are they spending now, let's say? I'm going to click column M. It's $44.5 million. And of course, I say of course, but not always, in the status bar at the bottom of the screen, we see various statistical measures. Now, you're not necessarily going to see all of these. You have control over what's being displayed. And what triggers this display is highlighting 2 or more cells with numbers. So I've highlighted 2 cells, gives me the total, minimum, maximum, average, and so on and so on. But I can see at a glance by clicking column M what this company is spending on various compensations here. $44.5 million. I can see an average amount there, which is a little misleading because some of those people are half-time in contract and so on. I can also compare it with the previous salary. And moving off here to the left, we can do things like, for example, here, I'm going to click column F and see that the most recent person was hired on June 6th. of this year. You've got a max down there. The person who's been here the longest was hired back in June of '93. So on. Average years of service, we'll see this down here. So how do you control this? There's a possibility that you're not seeing anything under these circumstances. Right-click the status bar. You'll see lots of check marks, but in this cluster right here, there are 6 different statistical measures. I usually leave them all checked. Why not? Doesn't hurt. Sometimes that information, a lot of it isn't useful, but I often want to see sum and average, and sometimes max and min and so on. So I usually leave them all checked. But you have the right to come in here at any time and change these. And whatever change you make is going to stay that way until you change it again. If we were looking at job ratings, why would I ever want the total? It wouldn't make any sense at all, but I do want an average. So average job rating here is almost 3.2. So it tells me something about the data at a glance. Now, suppose we really do want a total here. And I want to total the new comp here. I just put the headings over here ahead of time. So I want to add up that data. Why not use autosum, alt equal for starters? There we go. And when you press alt equal, Excel makes a guess, sometimes a bad guess. Why would I want to add up those 2 cells there? That wouldn't make any sense at all, the new and the old. What I really want to do is add up all the data in column M. Now, what some people will do here, and it's certainly not wrong, is to click on cell M2 and maybe press Shift Control down arrow, something like that. Or maybe start clicking and dragging from M2 downward, or maybe even typing. But it's going to be much, much faster if we simply click column M. And that's it. Enter. We got our total. Now, this is good for a number of reasons. First of all, it's got a clean look to it. At first, maybe you're not sure what it means, but this means column M. That means everything in column M. M1's got text in it, so what? It's ignored. Now, what happens if this list grows or shrinks? We don't have to readjust this formula. So it's ideal for dynamic situations. And it's easier to read, too. If this said M2 colon M699, if we added 5 new records, we'd have to change this for it to be accurate. Now, of course, you've got to know your data and know that there are no interim subtotals within this list anywhere. You don't have a grand total on the bottom and so on. But it's really handy, and using entire column references and formulas sometimes is really going to be helpful. Now, a quick average here, I might do this by going to the drop arrow for autosum. I'll choose average, ignore what it's doing, click column M and enter. Average comp. Looks like that. So on. Median isn't in that list, so we have to type it. And here, too, I'll point out, when you're typing function names, and I did this earlier, too, there's no reason to capitalize those. It doesn't hurt, but because they're capitalized later, some people make the assumption that they needed to be capitalized. Equal median. I'm going to click column M. I don't need to put in the right parentheses. A lot of times people, oops, hold on there a second. Something happened on the display. And it looks as if my screen has frozen. This happens from time to time. What I might need to do here is possibly another restart. What I'm doing is attempting to log in again. I think that's, there's nothing else seems to be happening.
Okay.
Should take less than a minute here.
Let me know when you want me to convert it back over. I didn't know if there was anything
Okay.
private there, so I'll make you presenter when you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah, actually someone proposed a very good question. I appreciate that. Polling question while we wait. So Absolutely. Let's head into our polling lounge and go and answer a polling question here. This is poll number 2, by the way. And this is a requirement for CPE, and this class is, of course, eligible for 1.5 credits. And even if that is not your motivation for being here, we want to make sure that we get our responses in and close this down. But I'll go over the results here in just a second. And we could even go into our second one, so we can knock a couple out of the way, Dennis, if you need more time, so it's not a problem.
Okay. Okay.
All right, we're at 91%, and I believe the response was VLookup. Is that right, Dennis?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, by far, apparently, from what I've heard. When I was doing a lot of public seminars, I would always ask people why they came to the seminar or what features in Excel they came to learn about, and many, many times VLookup was there. Often pivot tables is usually the top 2.
Sure. Yeah, we're going to ask a question at the end, too, that dives in a little deeper there to find out what would be of great interest for you for future sessions. So we'll keep that in mind as we consider pivot tables. And this is the next polling question. We're at number 3 of 6. And there is no requirement by NASDA in terms of how frequently the polls are released, so there's no problem in doing a couple back-to-back here. And over half of you are saying Excel 2010. No surprise there. And we're doing better on this poll. We're at about 95%. And we'll close this one down here in a second.
I keep getting the message that I'm already logged in here, so I'm trying to essentially log out. So.
Do you want me to make you presenter again?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm a little reluctant. Yeah, it looks like Dennis, you got booted out. So we're going to have to wait till he logs back in. Sorry about this, folks.
Okay.
There we go. Dennis, you're back in now. And make you an organizer. And we'll make you a presenter. And when you're ready, you can accept that.
Okay.
We still have a full hour left to go, and we could always extend a little past if we need to for Q&A. Sorry for the disruption, but these things happen when we're using a lot of technology, and may happen when Murphy's Law is present. Someone had asked if there are any handout materials, and the answer was yes. All right. I was filibustering there. Dennis, are we back in?
I'm trying to activate my Excel here. I might have to shut down the current version of Excel.
Sorry, folks, I run out of stories to tell. I could tell you about my weekend if you'd like. Maybe someone has some good Excel nightmare stories themselves they'd like to share.
Okay, I'm restarting Excel. We should be up momentarily here. And what we were talking about was the fact that, and let's see, we can probably do it this way. There we go. Yeah. I was talking here about median and this idea. Whenever you're typing a function, first of all, it doesn't have to be capitalized. And this example here too, rather than highlighting data, as we did in the previous 2 examples, I'll simply click column M so we can get the median there. Don't have to type or write parentheses. Anytime you're using a function by itself and you're not doing any kind of nesting and not doing anything else unusual in the formula, When you have only a single set of parentheses, you don't have to type the right parent, just press enter. It's a minor time saver, but it helps speed things up a little bit too. Okay, let's start talking about the if function. An important function, almost programming-like. And for many people, it can be easy to use. In fact, many examples are easy. They're straightforward. It can also, it has the ability, you might say, to deal with very complex situations. And you might occasionally encounter an if function that just seems to go on and on and on. So we've got a worksheet here, and this company has decided to give bonuses to people based on their job rating. So we see the job ratings there. And for the moment, that's all we really need to see here. I am going to make column K wider, not because we really need to ultimately, but I want to make sure as I use this function that it's large and clear on the screen here. Let's imagine in English, this is what the company has said. If your job rating is 4 or 5, we're going to give you a $2,000 bonus. Otherwise, nothing. So the if function allows us to test for a condition and then provide two answers, one for when the condition is true, another for when the condition is false. And in its simplest form, that's all the if function does. And many, many times it's straightforward. And when you're working with your own data, it's real clear. Equal if, left parentheses. A logical test. Sometimes you'll be comparing two different cells, or maybe a cell with some kind of a breakpoint value. You can compare a cell with a formula. You can compare with a text string. A lot of different possibilities here. A simple one we're going to be using here is J2, and we can do this in two ways. We can indicate that it's greater than 3, so what could it be? It's got to be 4 or 5 if it's greater than 3. We could state it this way, or we can put in the greater than symbol followed by equal to, and put in a 4. That means greater than or equal to 4. So either of those two constructions are going to work for this context. Comma, what's going to be the answer here? The answer could be a cell reference. It can be a value. It can be a text string. It can be a formula. It can be a blank. Double quote, we'll put in a blank. We want to put in 2,000 in the example. If it's a number, it need not be enclosed in double quotes. If it's text, it's within double quotes. So when this condition is true, the answer is 2,000, comma. When it's not true, if we want to put in 0, that's fine. We can put in 0. If we want to put in space or blank, actually, there is a difference, by the way. Blank is double quote, double quote. That's what we'll put in there. And that will display nothing in the screen. If you want text, now an HR professional probably wouldn't do this, but you could put in something like this, or maybe do better or whatever, but let's say we don't go there. We'll just put in blank. We don't need to type that right paren. I'm going to press Control-Enter, and then double-click the lower right-hand corner, and we'll have a bunch of answers. Pressing F2 to go into edit mode for just the top cell re-exposes the formula. So nothing too sophisticated, nothing too fancy here. You can see the other answers. Currently, we're not seeing the answer for cell K3, but it was a blank. You saw it there briefly. And we see all the other answers that seems to make sense. So nothing too unusual about this. And again, I only made the column wider because we are going to expand this function, and I want to make sure that you can see all the different things we're going to be doing here. So after a while, the company changes its mind and says, okay, we're going to alter this a little bit. The people who have a job rating of 3, they deserve a bonus, although less of a bonus. So here's what you wouldn't necessarily know. The logic happens in a left to right order. When this condition is true, the answer is 2,000 and the function ends. When the condition is not true, you could say the logic jumps behind this second comma here. And what might we want to do if we're considering giving job ratings to people who have 3 here? Put in another if. This is called a nested if. Now remember, the logic will only go here when the job rating is 1, 2, or 3. So we're going to start all over again, so to speak, another if this J2 equals 3. In this case, it does happen to be equal to 3. When that's true, comma, we're going to give these people $800. Comma, when it's not true, nothing. That's an if inside of an if. These are called nested ifs. We need another right paren that must be typed. Now, since all these cells are highlighted, I'll press Control-Enter. It's going to take care of all of them. And I'll press F2 again so we can see that top entry. So there we are. We've got three possible answers, 2,000 or 800 or blank. And we see those spilling out in column K over there. And we only see the 800 in the case of where the job rating is 3. Now, in the first one, of course, it's 3. It's 800 there also. Oh, now, imagine, now you might question the wisdom of the company. They're even going to give a small job rating to the people who have 2s. And we'll give them a token $100 as if to say, you know you can do better. So another if in here. Now, at this point, we would only be encountering those who have job ratings of 1 or 2. So we're going to check to see if it's equal to 2. Comma, and if it is, we'll give these people $100. If not, blank. This is an if inside of an if inside of an if. Now, nobody's really counting, but that counts as 2 nested ifs. Let me complete the entry and redisplay it. There we are. Now, you might have seen situations like this, or possibly you will see situations with even more ifs. And in older versions of Excel, before 2007, the most nested ifs you could have had was 7. Now, this is only 2, so you can imagine what that might look like. And the logic starts to get pretty involved maybe at times. And believe it or not, enough people said to Microsoft, we don't have enough nested ifs, we need more. So Microsoft responded by giving us 64. Imagine what that might look like, 64 nested ifs. Now, it's not a goal to have more nested ifs, but if the logic demands it, or if the situation demands it, this might be a solution here. If there were a mathematical association between the job rating number and the number, and a mathematician might be better at this than some of us, we could come up with a formula here. We might not even need an if. In the example here, the numbers are a little bit irregular, so we need something like this. But I also want to take this in a different direction, and that's the idea that sometimes you've got what might be called a compound condition. So scrolling to the left here, I'm going to bring into view here 2 other fields, the years of service and the status. I don't need to see the benefits right now, so I'm going to right-click column I and hide this. There we are. But I want to change this. The company has changed its mind again. It's going to backtrack a little bit, but then expand it in the following way. We're only going to give bonuses to people who have a good job rating, but they must be full-time. So let's say we clean out a lot of this, or get rid of some of this at least, and kind of start over, but put in the word and right after the left parentheses. Left parentheses. By the way, the function called and can be a standalone function. Many times it's embedded within an if, but it can be a standalone function by itself. We want to say 2 things. You've got a good job rating, it's 4 or 5, comma, and, we don't use the word and out here, we use it before the parentheses, and your status here, that's in cell H2, equals double quote full-time. You must spell it exactly the way you see it. Actually, the upper lower case isn't critical, but the spacing certainly is. F-U-L-L space time. Right parentheses, comma, 2,000, if not blank. We need to get rid of this comma, and we don't need as many trailing parentheses out there now. So in English, what are we about to say? If you've got a good job rating and your status is full-time, you'll get the 2,000. Now that means if and only if. In other words, both of these must be true. Now I remember when I first saw the and I had been a prior user of Lotus 123, in the old Lotus 123, you'd put the word and between the conditions. But the reason Excel doesn't do this, and it's a good reason too, is that not only are you limited, or can you have 2 conditions here, but you can have 3, 4, 5, up to 31, I believe it is. And repeating the word and between every condition here would be quite cumbersome and lengthy. So think of the word and as appearing between these, but we might have 3 conditions, 4 conditions, and when all of them are true, and only when all of them are true, is this the answer right here. So when both of these are true, you get $2,000, otherwise nothing. So I'm going to recalculate these, and there we see what's happening. And here's the redisplay again. So in some cases, for example, in row 7, row 8, row 7, that person is full-time, but doesn't get the job rating because he or she does not have the right job rating. And farther down there in row 10, good job rating, great job rating, but that person is hourly, doesn't get it. Got to have both. And sure enough, a companion function called OR, and we'll use it in the same way we use it in English. I think you know what's going to happen here. If either condition is true, either you have a good job rating or you are full-time, and of course that includes both, Control-Enter, and redisplay it. That's a more popular decision by management. As we see here, many more people are getting the increase here. So that's certainly expanding it a bit. Now, when you know the data, when you work with it, and you've been working with it, these things fall into place maybe a little bit more easily and readily than you might think. The logic is clear. It's strictly standard logic here. Now, it's easy to say that, but sometimes when these are thrown into your face, you kind of sit down and figure them out a little bit. Now, sometimes you use ands and ors together. I don't think too many people will do that often, but just to show that you can do it. And we're not trying to say, in effect, that you want to make these more complex, but this company changes its mind again and says, okay, the following. We're going to give you a bonus for one of two major reasons. Either you have a good job rating, that's that, but if you don't, you might have the combination of being full-time, comma, and your years of status out here, or your years of service, that's what I meant to say. Years of service are greater than 9. So here's an and inside of an or. Now, once again, if this is thrown into your face, you've never seen it, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? It seems kind of crazy, but it's not, ultimately. Complete that and redisplay it. So we've got situations here where maybe somebody doesn't have a good job rating, like the person in row 11 down there. That person does not have a good job rating, but on the other hand, that person does have the combination of 19 years of service and full-time. Meets the other two criteria, although it doesn't have a good job rating. So we can see how these play out. And again, when it's your data and you've been working with it, you might be surprised how what seemingly is kind of complex falls into place nicely here as we look at these examples here. Now, if that's all we wanted to do with if here, and we were done with this, of course, the column all along didn't have to be that wide. I'm going to double-click the boundary between K and J out there, double-click. And, of course, it need only be this wide. The column need only be as wide as the answers, and that makes sense there. And how much is the company spending on bonuses? I'll click column K. They're spending $918,000. I can see that in the status bar at the bottom. That's it. So that's an expenditure, of course, and they've probably thought that out ahead of time, or at least they're thinking it out now. And by simply changing that top formula from 2,000 to something else, we have a different total. And even more flexible, you could imagine, instead of this 2,000 being here, maybe there's a number out in cell P2 or somewhere out there, and it's no matter what the entry is here, we're going to pick up the value from cell P2. So we could put in P2 here with an absolute address and put a number out there, and then have that flexibility to jump back and forth even. And some of you may even be familiar with a feature called goal seek, where you can say, in effect, I want the total of the new bonuses to be $750,000. That's it. You tell me what this rate needs to be. And that's kind of a cool feature too. All right, one more example of this, by the way. We're not going to do too much with this, but just to point out a nice little shortcut and a tip here too. On a different worksheet, this one here that we had seen earlier, whoops, yeah, I'm going to momentarily close that. There we go. On this worksheet that we saw earlier, there is a formula at the bottom that's it's a bit unwieldy. And I'll zoom in on it and double click. And imagine if that just sort of fell into your lap and you're trying to figure out what's going on there. That's a lot to handle, a lot of ands and ifs. Now, here's a little shortcut that seemingly, for the moment, is not related, but it is. If you were putting in a column heading and you want to put in, for example, 2014 salary, you might, as you start to type it, think, this column is going to be a lot wider because the heading is so wide. Let's put salary in the same cell right underneath this. Let's press Alt-Enter, and I'll type salary, and Enter. All I did was press Alt-Enter, and then the column could be narrower if we're only going to be putting in that amount. So how does that apply to this function here in cell B42? I'm going to double-click. There it is. I'm editing this right now. I'm going to click in front of the second if and press Alt-Enter. and then the next if, and then the next one, and all of them ultimately, and down here too, and even the first one maybe. Now, I'm not saying that there's instant comprehension here, but when the formula is displayed like this, I've got a much better chance to figure out what's going on. So, and this doesn't change anything. In other words, if I press enter, no result has changed. As it turns out, if you really did work with this logic, I think you eventually realize it could be more efficient. We're not going to worry about it, but just to point out the idea. And you can do this in any formula if you wish. By pressing Alt-Enter, you introduce a line break, and sometimes it clarifies the logic or maybe the lack of logic within a function. Notice the color coding there of the parentheses. This is 4 nested ifs. 4 nested ifs. Imagine what 7 would look like, or 10, or 20. Almost unthinkable. Anyway, shortcut there. Now, I want to go back to the other data, and imagine what if you had more or less mastered the if function, or you used it a lot, and it's all well and good. By the way, there's a term I want to jump back to just momentarily here. We sometimes refer to functions like this as job security formulas. Nobody knows how to fix this except you, and maybe you've made it more cumbersome than necessary. So it's not always the case. All right, back here. If you've gotten pretty proficient with the if function, what if you had to come up with a tax rate here? Now, off to the right, we're about to see a tax table. What I'm going to do is hide columns P, Q, and R. We don't need to see them for now. Right-click and hide. We've got a tax table over here. Let me actually delete column S. We don't need that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're trying to look up a tax rate here based on a table here. And maybe you've worked with lookup tables, maybe you haven't. But if you were trying to somehow use the if function, and it could be theoretically done, and you're trying to come up with answers for this table, because there are, well, I think there are 11 different answers here, it's probably going to take about at least 9 nested ifs to get there. The if function is not the way to go here. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that the answer to complex ifs is going to be a lookup function, but in some cases it will. First of all, there is a function we're about to talk about, an important function. And as you saw in the polling question, this is the most important function for many, many people, and it's the one that's most frequently Googled out on the web, which is the function that people are trying to find out about. There are 2 major lookup functions, and of course some others too, VLookup and HLookup. V means vertical, H means horizontal. When you're looking up information in a table, the table might be oriented vertically, like this one, and that's probably more commonly seen than the other kind of table, like we have off to the right here, which is oriented horizontally. I'm going to zoom back a bit here so we can see both of these together. Just by showing a horizontal and a vertical table together that contain the same information, I think you can probably see why VLookups are much, much more common. And I'd estimate, at least in my experience, that anytime there's a lookup information where you're trying to compare information from different sets of data, about 80% of the time maybe, VLookup is the one to be used. You can just see how it just fits on the Excel screen better. Now, when you're trying to compare information with another set of information, many, many times it could be 2 columns, but by no means are we saying here that this is a 2-column situation only. Sometimes you have many, many columns. This can be quite involved. And the example I'm about to show here, again, I want to be careful to somehow suggest these are not the only kinds of examples. Another situation where people are trying to make comparisons might be something, and again, these I don't want to make these too suggest that they're necessarily typical, but here's a different set of names. What if this data is in one worksheet or one workbook, and this data is in another, and you're trying to match up names, and you've got thousands of them? You're going to have some big problems looking them up. Now, when I say table of information, many times when you work with VLookup, you see that word table. That's starting to get a little confusing because Excel has introduced a new feature in 2007 called the table. And so we want to be a little bit careful with how we use the terms. But let's say matching up information from different sets of data that might be on different worksheets and different workbooks seems to be an increasing need, partially based on the idea that many of us these days are getting getting data from other sources, maybe the internet, maybe from another company or another service or another piece of software, and we're trying to reconcile or pull data together. The function you're most likely going to need is going to be VLookup. And these lists sometimes are enormous in depth and sometimes in width as well. So let's start with a somewhat simple example and also point out something else here. When we work with lookup functions, whether VLookup or HLookup, there are two major styles, you might say, two major types. Sometimes when we're looking up data, we need to find information exactly. Suppose you're looking up somebody's name. It's got to be an exact match. Suppose we're looking up social security number. It's got to be exact. The other situation, which we're about to show first, is generally referred to as an approximate match. So here's what we're about to do. We're about to use a VLookup here in column N that in effect will be comparing this value, the 53,000, with the left column of VLookup. By definition, VLookup will make a comparison with the left column of a set of data. Call it a table, call it what you want, but for example, this list right here. Now, momentarily stepping out of Excel, thinking only as how you read numbers and see them in a list. If someone makes $53,000 here, which tax rate does that person have? Let's imagine, if only our tax system were this simple. Of course it isn't. Maybe this is an adjusted rate, so we're not going to quibble with the details. But what would be your assessment? Probably 7%. Most of you probably, or let's say many of you probably, have done your own taxes at different times. You know how, as you get toward the bottom line, you're comparing a number with the list, and if you have not reached a certain value, you pay the value associated with the previous number. So if you haven't reached 55,000 here, then you're going to be 7%. That's how VLookup will work here. So I'm going to make column N a little bit wider. It doesn't ultimately need to be, but like with if, I'll do this, and I'll zoom in even more. This is an example of an approximate match. There are two kinds of major VLookups, an approximate match and exact match. Equal VLookup, left parentheses. What are we looking at? This value in M2, the 53,000, comma. The pop-up tip next says table array. Where is this data? It's right here. Let's go highlight it. Now, this can be on another worksheet. If it were, I'd click that other worksheet and go highlight the data there. And that's a common situation. We're not in any way suggesting when you're doing lookups that these must be on the same sheet. A lot of times they're not. But that's the table location. Table array, as it says in the pop-up here. Comma. The third part of this, column index number. And that doesn't quite explain itself, but which column of the table has the answers that we're looking for? We're looking for those percentages. They're in column T. But we don't put in a T here, we put in the number 2. It's the second column as we look at the table left to right. Column S is column 1, column T is column 2. Don't need to press parentheses or put in the right paren, I'll simply press Control-Enter. That's looking good. That's probably not the way we'd want to see it displayed. So up on the Home tab, there's the percent button. So there's our answer. Unlike the if function, which almost sort of, you can follow it along step by step, VLookup, particularly if you don't use it very often, you have to kind of remind yourself what it does. It doesn't, you might say, explain itself. Here's the value we're looking up. Here's this table array somewhere else. Here's the column of that table array that has the answer. There it is. Now, before copying this down the column, we need to make this absolute. Now, I'll give you a better way to do this in a second, but let's say we make it absolute. We highlight the data, press F4. Control-Enter so the active cell doesn't move. Double-click the lower right-hand corner, and we've got a bunch of correct answers here. Once again, pressing F2 so we can see this. Now, because it's absolute, it tends to look a little more dense, a little more crowded, and because we're using column S in the example here too, the S's and the dollar signs, particularly if you were at a lower zoom level, they kind of blur together here. Nevertheless, we have correct answers here. Now, a couple of thoughts about approximate matches. And this is confusing at times, but if these numbers are not in ascending order, you will get some bad answers. Now, they're not going to be bad in the sense of looking wrong. You'll just have to sort of discover them later, and maybe unhappily. Suppose this 35 was just an 85 by mistake here. Now, as you keep an eye on column N, it's quite possible that most of those are not going to change. Maybe none of them on our screen. I think one of them did at the bottom there. But so what we've got here are a bunch of correct answers, but here and there, some of them are not correct. And that's unsettling. You've got to make sure in a VLookup, when we're using an approximate match, these must be in ascending order. And you must cover the lower amount. If somehow or other, if we started our table here, and if someone had 24,000, we would get an error here. I believe it says # value or something like that. We don't have to cover the higher end. These are automatically covered. They're going to be 13% if there's any salary above 95,000, any compensation above that. That's going to be fine. So I'm going to change this back again. I'll simply do undo, and any changes that had occurred are corrected. But you've got to be on top of that. And again, don't expect bad numbers there to jump out at you. They won't. Okay, this is an example of an approximate match. If we were using the other table to the right, the function would be very similar. However, of course, the first obvious difference, that would be an H, horizontal, H lookup. Obviously, the address of the table array would be different, but the two would stay the same, but it certainly would mean something different. It would mean the second row of the table array. In other words, the data over there to the right that you see. So, now, by the way, there will be situations when you get a workbook, a worksheet from somebody else, or something maybe you've worked on in the past. If you already have a horizontal table and you've got lots of formulas that are already working off of it, you just can't blithely throw that away. You're going to keep that and maybe work with H lookups instead of a V lookup. So I'm not suggesting that H lookup is invaluable. It's not, and you'll see it too. And there will be times when it could be the better use. Although most of the time, if you are setting up the data, VLookup is likely to be the better choice. Now, it might be more common, and again, we all use Excel in different ways, but an exact match, anytime you're looking up text, or if it's an ID number, it's got to be an exact match. Now, with Social Security numbers, you can't say, well, that's close enough. No, it's got to be exact. So we're not talking approximate match. Here's a different worksheet, and you can probably see pretty quickly what we're trying to do, and I'm not quite there yet, but every person in this list has been given a text rating here. We want to convert these into a score based on that table over in column A. Now, one thing I want to do before I get here, I want to go back to the other list just briefly here. I mentioned earlier that we had to make this address absolute. But I think a better way here is to simply refer to the column letters. Now, I mentioned that earlier as a shortcut. Instead of this, what if I drag across columns S and T? That's certainly easier to read. Doesn't mean it's a lot more, it doesn't look nearly as complex. Now, you might be saying, well, doesn't that have to be absolute? If we are only copying this formula down the same column, by inference, it's going to be the same. Now, let me temporarily step aside and press Control-tilde. That was our shortcut to show formulas. And you can certainly see the difference there between these two. This is a lot less complex looking, it's a lot easier to read, and it will work. I'm going to press Control-tilde again, copy this down the column by double-clicking, and those answers are all going to be the same. One caveat here, just make sure there's nothing else in columns S and T. And that's probably going to be the case. That's easy to adhere to. These are a lot easier to read than they were before. In the other worksheet here, those that we saw momentarily, I'm using that technique out here in cell F2. Now recognize for the moment, fair, which should be a 71, is a 50. So what's not happening here just yet? In this example of VLookup, we have done nothing to indicate that we need an exact match. I'm going to zoom in as much as possible on this too. Make this column narrower so we can see this large and clear. Here's a VLookup in place, but we're not getting the correct answer. Everything so far is correct. We're looking at this value E2. Here's that column reference. That's where the table array is, columns A and B. We want to get answers out of the second column. It's column B, that's correct. However, for an exact match, and this is not intuitive, we put in comma, and there's a fourth argument. Excel calls it range lookup. I don't think that says much to most of us. And neither does this thought. False means exact match. Now, did you think that all along? Do you think false means exact match? Well, that's what we do here. You can tab it into place or type it. So, false means exact match. Now, yeah, I knew that all along, right? Well, of course you didn't. But that's what we do if we want to make sure that our VLookup is an exact match. So anytime we're looking at data that's text or ID number type, we need this to be an exact match. Now, false works. It will give us the correct answer here. I want to suggest an alternate way, and that's 0. 0 means exact match. Now, is that any more logical? Not necessarily. It's less typing, and false might give the connotation to some people that something failed, so I just use 0. It's just easier, faster. Also, as we'll see in the index or in the match function, 0 means exact match as well. So we have a correct answer here. I'll press Control-Enter and double-click down the column. Anytime you're using exact match, you need a fourth argument, as it's called. 0 or false means exact match. If you don't have it there, the default is approximate match. We could have put in the word true earlier, but we didn't need to. True means approximate match. And again, why? Why true? Why false? A little bit strange there, maybe. Now, a couple thoughts here. If you've got spaces involved here, I'm going to put in a trailing space here after fair. Test fails. Down here between very and good, I'm going to put in multiple spaces. How about a leading space right here? Space or two. These all fail. A quick workaround, short of fixing up column E to get rid of them, is in front of the E2 here, put in the function called trim. Trim gets rid of trailing spaces, it gets rid of leading spaces, and it reduces multiple consecutive inner spaces to just a single space. So I'll complete that. That's going to work just fine. Double click. All these are corrected. So sometimes you might need to use that. Keep in mind, too, that it's not uncommon when you're making these comparisons that you're on a different worksheet, and the table array is a different worksheet from where the data resides. But this cleans up the data in the example here. What it can't do, of course, is if the word or phrase here just isn't in the list. So Travis Bickle, your performance was just plain lousy. Well, that's not in the list. What can Excel do? It can't go to a dictionary and look up the word, although who knows what's going to happen one of these years. But anyway, you see what's happening.
Your audio
exact
again
match means exact match. It's got to be there. Okay, there will be times when you might have, as I said earlier, multiple columns. There could even be times when you're running into situations where VLookup just doesn't seem to work so well. So I've got a couple of other worksheets here with some different situations. Now, I'm going to let's say we imagine here that we've got a Social Security number that's on a different worksheet. And all we're trying to do, at least initially, is to say we simply want to know, does it exist in this other list somewhere? Does this exist in this list? Now, the reason I'm putting them side by side here is so we can readily see what's going on. But this could be on a different worksheet. And I do want to show you at least one example of how you do that, too. But let's say for the moment, we simply want to know if this exists. VLookup is not the best function to use here. We simply, the best thing to use here is the function called match. We're trying to match this value, comma, with a list somewhere else. I'm going to click column C rather than highlighting the data, because we can find anything in there regardless of where it is, no concern about sorting or the order of it, comma. And now we see 3 pop-ups. One for, let's find the number that's closest to but less than, -1, the value that's closest to but greater than, or 0 for exact match. This is why I use 0 with VLookup too. 0 for exact match, at least some consistency. Is Excel going to find this? And if so, what does it tell us? It found it in the 16th position of where we were looking. So where were we looking? Column C. If it's in the 16th position, then it's in the 16th row. And you can see that. It's Terry Malloy. So this simply tells us that it was found. Now we don't see the phrase found. We could somehow, with an if function, show you that. And if it isn't found, suppose this number is a 1 here, we get this. Now, sometimes that's all we need the match function for. But what if ultimately here what we wanted to do was to find the name associated with this? Now, VLookup cannot look leftward. If we find something, we can't look leftward. And let's imagine this situation is such that this is our master list. It's protected. You cannot change the order of it. In fact, maybe you can't even copy it. So you need to find the name associated with this. Sometimes you'll need to use the index function. Now, I'm not saying that the index function and the match function are always used together, but sometimes they are. And they give us more capabilities when we're trying to look up information from different lists. The index function is based on the concept of there's a table somewhere, a table of data. Actually, the term array is what's used here, so I'll use that too. We've got an array of data somewhere in columns A, B, and C, possibly on a different worksheet, comma. Let's pull out data from that array based on a row reference and a column reference. Which row do we need to get data out of? For the moment, I'll just type in 16, or maybe better yet, why don't I just use the result up here? And which column do we need to get the data out of? Column 1. So row reference, column reference, enter. And it's Terry Malloy. And we can see that down here. Now, although you don't necessarily need to do nesting, and if these functions both are brand new to you, and I'll momentarily press Control tilde so we can, off to the right there, see what they look like. We've got those two in place. Press Control tilde again. Why not take this function, highlight it, copy this portion of it, Control C, escape, double click in here, highlight this data, pop it into place there, Control V. There we go. By the way, a new function in Excel 2013, and perhaps a teaching tool as well, is a function called formula text. I use it from time to time. It simply displays the text of a formula in a different location. And as soon as you see it, you can just click it and tab it into place there. There we go. So that displays it as we look at it here. So, and that's, of course, what we're seeing right here. If I make changes to this, changes will occur over there, too. There's something else we could do in this situation to make it even easier. And again, I stress, when we're doing this, we might be starting in a different worksheet here. So, something else we might do. At the time that we actually need to come up with the name, we're not really looking in columns A through C. We're looking only in column A. So let's make that be column A. And here's the row reference we need. And because we're only now looking in a single column, we don't need the column reference. Let's get rid of that part of it. So it's even simpler. Now, once again, I stress, if you've never seen match, if you've never seen index, even though by themselves they're not difficult, trying to absorb how you might use those together might be a bit of a stretch here. I do want to suggest, too, in larger Excel books that cover functions and formulas, in all of them I've seen, anytime index is mentioned or match is mentioned, there's always a cross-reference to the other function, because from time to time you'll need to use these together. Now, I did want to point out the idea of using functions on different worksheets. So I'm going to take this data here and just do a Control-C, jump to a different worksheet over here somewhere. Imagine a different situation. I've got a Social Security number out here. I want to see if it exists in the other list. I might want to get the name. So I'll just paste it right here. So how do we do a VLookup or a match or any function from a different worksheet? I'm just going to start with equal match, left parent. Here's what I'm trying to match, comma. Where's that worksheet? I'll go down here and find it. There it is right there. Where am I looking? I'm looking in column C, comma. I want an exact match. I put in 0. I press enter. Now, the display there is should be 4 because it's in the 4th row, but what are we doing? Now, I didn't type this. You didn't see me typing it. I simply clicked on the other sheet. So this notation style with an exclamation point refers to a sheet name. And by the way, if the sheet name has a space in it, it'll look slightly more complex. You'll see a leading single quote and a trailing single quote when the sheet name has a space in it. Makes it look just slightly more complex. And going one step further here, equal index, if I want to get this person's name, index, where is that table, or that table array with the names? Back over here. master list, click column A, comma, and now I got to jump back here and pick up this data right here, comma, or actually no comma here, that's it. Herman Hollerith, there it is.
And
so,
Dennis, by the way, when you have a good break, I do want to get to another polling question or two.
Okay, I think now would be a good time. I do want to, just before the break that I want to mention here, working with lookup functions across multiple sheets certainly makes things a little more difficult, and we're not saying they're impossible, and they certainly are not, but if possible, if you are setting up the lookup table or if you're trying to compare the information, if it's possible to get them on the same worksheet, do so. It just makes life a little simpler, a little easier. Anytime you've got formulas that deal with different worksheets and even more complex, different workbooks, it just makes life a little bit more complex. All right, I think it is time for one of those questions.
Well, this one's almost complete. We're at about 80% here. We're going to let a few more responses come in, and then we're going to close it down. And I believe from the last presentation, you had indicated there was at least 450. Is that right?
Yes, the number of functions, yes. It's slightly over 450. You know, at different times I counted them, and I thought, this is kind of crazy. I mean, don't really need to know that. But again, it does give you some depth. And when you have that extra moment or two, and we don't really do this, but you know, if you click the Formulas tab, you see different kinds of functions that Excel could be categorizing them as. And by the way, strangely enough, statistical is not in this initial list. You click More Functions, it's there, but you've also got engineering functions. And I often say, if you have the wrong mindset, you're gonna do yourself in here, because you know, when was the last time, for example, that you needed inverse hyperbolic cosine? I mean, it's there. It's one of the math functions there. You know, nobody's going to need that unless you're a scientist and engineer, and certainly those people use Excel. But we're not going to worry about this. Just like we don't worry about all the words in a dictionary. Who has time to learn them all? And yet, of course, you don't need to. And that would be a bad idea to say that too, that you need to know them all. So there are tons of functions out here. Excel. Over 450 of them. All right, a few more functions here, and then we'll have some questions here. So the major lookup functions, again, VLookup by far the most frequently used, and the one, as we said, gets the most requests out on Google to give me some information on VLookup. Its companion HLookup from time to time is going to be used in certain environments, maybe more heavily than others. When they don't always fit the bill for what you need, take a look at match and index, and you'll find some sophisticated uses of those too. They're not always more complex, but often they are. Now, from time to time, you may be working with dates and times, and there are situations where these are sometimes not as well known as others, but I've got a list of data here. I just want to know, maybe this is a real estate company, or maybe it's a company that doesn't have sales every day. Maybe they sell heavy equipment or something like that. We wanted to know what day of the week these appear on. And the function we use here works just fine, although it's slightly disappointing in its answers here. And the function we're about to talk about here is weekday, equal weekday. Now, if the date entries are done with slashes or dashes, as we see in column A, things generally work okay. Click here. Answer is, what day of the week was that? It was Wednesday. Wednesday, well, yes, 1 is Sunday, 2 is Monday, etc. 3 is Wednesday, 4 is Wednesday, of course. There's the answer. Now, every time I see this, I want to instantly, call Microsoft and say, why don't you display the actual day of the week? Well, you can do it pretty quickly, although it's not as direct as you might want. We need to go to Format Cells here by way of Control 1. Control 1 is the best way to get to Format Cells, or nearly always the best way, the fastest way. Number tab, Custom, go right into Custom, and right under the word Type here, and usually, well, not necessarily where you see General, but you'll see something right under the word Type. You put in 3 Ds for an abbreviation, 4 Ds for a spelling. So WED or Wednesday, I put in 4 Ds, there it is. And we can copy this down the column to see what day of the week these are on. That sort of thing. Easy to do. There are some other date functions. By the way, when you are putting in dates here, I strongly suggest make the column wider. It will screen out those typos that we make sometime. Here's for example, is a typo. Maybe I'm adjusting this. This is really the 30th. I just happened to type a 31 by mistake. There is no April 31st. So Excel left aligns the data. Anytime Excel sees a slash or a dash, it evaluates the data with the potential that it could be a date. And if it is, it right aligns it, because what it really does is it stores values here. If you wanted to see those, you could press Control-Shift-tilde, and that's sort of meaningless, but every day from January 1st onward has a value. Normally we don't see the numbers, we don't care, so I'll simply undo that. But there's a value associated with each date. That allows for date math too. A couple of date functions you might be interested in here. Imagine that the project started on May 20th. It's going to end shortly after Labor Day. How many working days is this? First of all, most of you know, if you subtract dates, the later date minus an earlier date, you get an answer. It's the number of days, but it's counting all days, including weekend days. Let's not count the weekend days. Here the function is equal net work days. And as soon as you see it in the list, you can click it and tab it into place. We put in the starting date, comma, and the ending date. It's 77 days. That does not count Saturdays and Sundays, so that's 77. I'll move it over here. Now, if we don't want to count holidays, we've got to have a holiday list somewhere nearby. We've got one over there in column D. So once again, this time also not including the holidays, net work days. There we go. Starting date, comma, ending date, and where's our list of holidays? Now you can highlight just the relevant ones or all of them, doesn't make any difference, so I'll just grab them all here and enter. So instead of 77, it's going to be 74. If July 4th happens to be on a Saturday or Sunday, it will not do a double discounting. It will get it right and count it only once, and so on. So net work days, a valuable tool for calculating working days. In its reverse, you might say project actually started in, or will start in November, 45 days. We've got our holidays over here. And of course, that's near the end of the year. This is called workday. Whoops, let's see what's happening. Okay, something's strange going on my screen here. Maybe I'll do this in a different cell just to make sure here. Well, once again, this is frozen. I think what we probably should do, since I've gone a little bit longer anyway, maybe we'll just shift the focus back to you, the audience, and see if we can answer some questions. And meanwhile, I'll start try and restart Excel. Scott, are we seeing anything on the screen right now? Are you seeing anything?
Same thing you are in terms of it being frozen. I am going to take this time to launch a poll, make sure we have this one out of the way. And the question is, actually let me just preface it. We have a couple of Excel courses currently on our platform and have found that our audience really appreciates the classes and has found great value in it. There are additional classes that we are considering adding to the platform that expand into different areas, and what we would like would be your feedback to see which other courses you think would be most valuable to you. An hour and a half is certainly scratching the surface in terms of Excel, as you can tell with 400 and something functions. There's so much to be done, and then of course that doesn't even address pivot tables and so many other tools like macros and so forth. So the question here really is so that we can make sure that we're providing you with the highest quality content and the best content that's most relevant to you. And you're not making it easy because you're voting for everything here. Looking at the responses right now, about 50% of you voted. And I was thinking we were going to have a clear winner, but instead everyone's voting for everything, which is, I suppose, a positive sign in and of itself.
Yeah, that's good.
Shouldn't complain. Excellent. So, yeah, the winner here is Excel-powered tips and shortcuts, but only by a very small margin. And I'm sure Dennis could work out the statistical sampling and to show us what the standard deviation is here, but it's not much. We are at about 90%, and I'm going to close this one down. And interesting. All right, yeah, Excel charts and data management were the two lower ones, but everything else is at least 50% of you. So I'm going to go ahead and close that one down. Thanks for responding to that. Again, our requirements for CPE, is that you do need to make sure that you're logged in for at least 75 minutes. NASDA's requirement are 3 polling questions. There are certain states that require 4 polling questions, but we will issue credit for 3 responses. It's not a matter of them being correct or not. And Dennis, there were a couple closing comments that I wanted to make too, but would it be better for me to make those now and then save any remaining time for Q&A?
Yeah, and also I did want to, in the Q&A, I wanted to show one other function too, because I said at the very beginning I wanted to bring it out too. But yeah, I think we can make some announcements.
Well, why don't you do that then, because otherwise I was going to switch the screen, so feel free.
Okay. I believe now, and I hope you can see my Excel screen. Tell me when you can see my Excel screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'm in a worksheet here, and I can't add up the data in column B because I've got some errors. Now, imagine that it's a huge list. I found 2 of them. I could possibly get rid of the data. Maybe I'm going to somehow correct it later, but I'm trying to add the data here. And I'm stopped because I've got some errors in there. Now, imagine a huge list, a few thousand here, tens of thousands, and I've got an error down in row 8,000 or something. I mean, I don't want to go looking for these. I want to circumvent or add up all the data that is valid. Now, if you were fishing around for a function here, I doubt if you'd ever discover this one, but it's really valuable. It was introduced in Excel 2010. So I'm looking for this new function. Where might I go? Formulas tab. I have no idea what kind of function it is. Eventually you might say, oh, well, how about math and trig? Here's aggregate. What does that say? Returns an aggregate in a list or a database. Well, that's not very helpful. But, in fact, aren't you not supposed to use the word in the definition, the words that you're trying to define? But this is the one we want to use, aggregate. And it's a great tool, and it's long overdue. And I'm going to use it right here, equal aggregate. Now, first thing you see here, once you tab this into place here, or type it, is 19 choices. What is it I want to do? Do I want to do an average, a count, a max, min, sum, etc.? I want to do a sum. Put in the number 9. Now, that's not exactly obvious, but it is. If you've used the subtotal function, you'll see the same numbers, by the way. A function called subtotal. 9 means sum, comma. But here's the interesting part. There are 8 choices here. One of them is ignore error values. Another one, ignore hidden rows. One of them, ignore hidden rows and error values. And we got some other options here too. I'm just going to put in a 6, which means ignore error values, comma. And now, what is it I'm trying to add? Column B. Enter. I've got my answer. It ignores the errors. It simply picks up the good data. There it is. And you just got to, if you're going to be using it frequently, just remember 9 means sum. If I want to do an average over here, this is going to be aggregate, same tool, but I'm going to put in 1 for average, comma 6. The 6 means ignore the errors, comma, and here too, I'm trying to average the data in column B. So it's a long overdue tool. If you don't have this function, if you were using Excel 2007 or earlier, you're going to do a more complex if. With a workaround, it's not easy. This is great. So good function to know. All right, that's it for the things we said we were going to do. I'll turn it back to Scott momentarily.
All right, well, thank you very much. And yeah, we still have an additional polling question left to go. And before we do that, I just wanted to, first of all, Dennis, thank you very much for taking an hour and a half out of your Friday to present and share with us some incredibly powerful tools. And what I have up on the screen here is actually the first page of the PowerPoint handouts that we made available. And Excel and Access LLC have been very generous in providing us with a discount that we can share with our attendees for actually several different offerings, including remote training and on-site training. Some of it can be tailored to you. The third option there, you can see the rates that are listed, and this is, of course, additional resources if you're looking for customization for your particular needs. And I wanted to share that with you, and thank you for making that available, both Dennis and Chris. And what I'd also like to do is launch our 6th poll here. This is our final poll, and it's really just a question to help us understand where you would find the most value in using the resources. One of the most popular videos that we have out of our 160 on the site have been the Excel sessions, and this video is not going to be any exception. We are going to post this up to our library. We'll do that by the end of the day today. I might actually keep the last session on there just because of the audio issues, but if you do happen to go back and watch it, just know that the Excel files are exactly the same, and there'll be a nice clean recording for you available. And you can watch this at any time. And again, you can find this in cpaacademy.org in our archive library session. And a lot of you really stating that the video might be a great help to go back and review, and I could certainly relate to that. So thank you for sharing this. And we also have, let me close this one down, and you can see the contact information of both Dennis and Chris on the screen. Do you want me to go back and convert you to presenter, Dennis? Would that be helpful in going through some of the Q&A?
Yes, because if people still have questions, I want to be able to get to them too.
Okay, and can you scroll through those on the chat bar?
I believe so. Let me make sure I've got it active here.
Okay.
Okay, let me see what we got here.
Someone asked what the first polling question was. The first polling question was a straightforward one about whether or not you've downloaded the PowerPoints and the Access or the Excel file. So just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page with those. And while you're looking through those questions, I will comment that as long as you've been logged in for 75 minutes, then the ball's in our court to get you credit. We're going to run our own Excel file using a macro. In case you're wondering how the magic gets done, we use Excel extensively on our side to analyze 2 reports, do VLookups, run a macro, and spit out a file that essentially indicates exactly how many credits you've earned based on a number of different if-then rules. We then upload it into our system, and there's a workflow trigger that sends you an email. None of the things that we do would be as efficient, or even, I would, in my estimation, possible without Excel. We're going to issue literally 1,000 credits within about an hour, and there's almost no manual process involved in it at all. Just an unbelievable tool that we're so grateful to be able to use every single day. But ball's in our court. We are going to get that credit out to you. It's going to send you an email to let you know your account's been updated. You could log into your account. You can print out the certificate, or you could just keep it there on hold. Just keep in mind you can also access the PowerPoint slides. You can go back and watch the video that way. You can fill out the proctor letter if you attended this class in a group setting, which I know a lot of you have. I want to guess at least 75 to 100 of you are sitting in a conference room right now somewhere around the country along with your colleagues, which I think is just awesome. Hopefully you're able to bounce ideas off of each other and come up with some time savings tools. But that proctor letter instantly gets you your CPE. The evaluation is required. We do want your feedback. We take it very seriously. It was very helpful that you responded to the question about which other courses would be a benefit to you. Telling us that you want the courses back, letting us know what you think is really the best way to get what you're looking for, and compliments will get you everywhere, and we certainly hope that Dennis is going to commit some more time to us in addition to the classes he already has on the calendar with us. Dennis, should I go back and make you presenter again?
Yeah, momentarily I'm not seeing that chat list, so if you could possibly read it, yeah, if you can first of all give me control back, and I'm not sure.
You know, there are perhaps too many questions for me to review given the late hour, and many of them you've addressed in part throughout. So if that is an issue, we might just want to hold off for now. And I mean, we have a lot of different questions covering a lot of different territory. I do think it would probably be best if you were able to scroll them. We otherwise might conclude the session for the afternoon and wind things down.
There's one other thing I might add too, that even though on-site training, some people think that's not as efficient, but you know, imagine today's presentation at a slightly slower pace with you in the audience pausing and asking questions at different times as I was doing things. You know, stop, hey, how'd you do that? That sort of thing. The give and take of a live session sometimes is really valuable. And today's session, if it were live, probably would have been a bit longer, maybe 2 hours, but imagine we could have gotten to other features and other functions and so on. So like a half-day session of just formulas and functions is a great tool for live learning. That give and take that you get in the live session is really helpful. I probably don't have to really explain that to most people, and I think a lot of people recognize that, you know, we learn in different ways, and both live sessions and webinars and, you know, online training. We've got, you know, quite a few different vehicles here, so it's worth considering those.
Excellent. Well, certainly hope that people will take that under consideration. Dennis, I did make you presenter. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share on the screen.
My GoToWebinar right now has been paused for some reason. I'm not sure why, and I can't get back into it. So.
Okay. All right. So with that said, we are going to wind things down. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe, and hopefully we'll have you back on the line with us again starting on Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.